Imagine you're living 50,000 years ago. No courts, no judges, no lawyers billing you by the hour for services rendered in language you don't fully understand. No prisons, no police departments, no municipal code violation notices left passive-aggressively on your door while you were out running errands. No institution of any kind dedicated to the formal, organized, state-sanctioned administration of justice. And someone in your group just stole your food, or attacked someone weaker without provocation, or kept taking more than their share at every single communal meal, while everyone else quietly seethed and said nothing individually because nobody wanted to be the one to start something. Or they started behaving in ways that made the rest of the group feel genuinely, persistently unsafe, erratic, violent, unpredictable. The kind of person whose presence transforms the social atmosphere of a small band from cooperative and functional into tense, watchful, and quietly exhausted. What do you do? This is not a rhetorical question designed to make you feel grateful for modern institutions. It's one of the most important practical problems ancient humans face continuously across hundreds of thousands of years of existence. And they solve it not with stone tablets, not with written law, not with any formal institution we would recognize as a justice system today. They solved it with something older, more flexible, more socially intelligent, and in some ways more genuinely egalitarian than anything that came after it. And the way they solved it tells us something profound about where every legal system that followed eventually came from. Because here's the thing most people have never been told. The impulse to punish is not a product of civilization. The machinery for social justice didn't arrive with cities and kings and written codes carved into polished stone pillars. It was running in a recognizably functional and remarkably 156 sophisticated form in small bands of 159 hunter-gatherers long before any of that 201 existed. Humans were building Justice 204 systems before they built walls. Let's 207 go through exactly how it worked, and 208, then what happened when civilization 210 arrived and decided to formalize 212 everything. First, you have to 214 understand the social context of 216 pre-agricultural life because the 218 context changes everything about what 220 punishment meant, how it operated, and 222 why it took the specific forms it took. Pre-agricultural hunter-gatherers. The 228 people we're talking about when we say 230 ancient humans in this context lived in 233 small, highly mobile bands of typically 20 to 50 individuals. Everybody knew everybody. You couldn't 241 hide your behavior for long. You couldn't develop a carefully cultivated 245 reputation as a generous and trustworthy 247 person in one part town while quietly 249 behaving very differently somewhere 250 else. Because there was no other part of 252 town. The community was the entire 255 social world, and it was observing 256 everything you did continuously. Because 259 in a group that size, there is 301, effectively no private behavior that the 303 group doesn't eventually learn about 304 through proximity, observation, and the 307 oldest information network in human 309 history, which is gossip, but we'll get 312 to that. This created a social 314 environment radically different from 316 modern, anonymous urban life. In one 318 critical way, your reputation was not 320 merely socially important. It was 323 existential in the most literal sense of 325 the word. Your survival, your access to 327 shared resources, your ability to form 330 alliances that would matter during 331 illness or injury or conflict, your 334 reproductive prospects, your ability to 336 call on collective help when you were 338 vulnerable. All of it flowed directly 341 from your standing within a group. 343 destroy your reputation, and you didn't 346 lose social status in the way a modern 348 person loses social status. Access to everything the group made possible, which in a Paleolithic environment was essentially everything. That separated you from an extremely difficult solo existence in a landscape full of predators, unpredictable food availability, and no institutional safety net of any description. This is the foundation on which the entire pre-agricultural justice system rested. Not law, not authority, not force applied by designated officials. The foundation was interdependence and the awareness of interdependence and the understanding shared, implicit, never needing to be written down, that your continued membership in good standing within this specific group of people was the single most important asset you possessed. Anthropologist Christopher Bow spent decades studying hunter-gatherer societies across every inhabited continent and documented their social control mechanisms in landmark works. Most notably, his book Hierarchy in the Forest, published by Harvard University Press. His conclusion, reached after systematically analyzing data from 48 distinct human societies representing the full geographic range of human hunter-gatherer experience, was both elegant and genuinely counterintuitive to modern assumptions. Hunter-gatherer societies were not anarchic. They did not operate on pure individual survival, instinct with no social regulation. They were intensely, deliberately, collectively egalitarian. And they maintained that egalitarianism through a sophisticated multi-stage system of social enforcement that operated without any formal institution, designated authority, or written rule of any kind. Bow called it the reverse dominance hierarchy. And the name captures something important. In most primate societies, chimpanzees, gorillas, baboons, the powerful dominate the weak. Alphas take the best food, the best mates, the best resting positions. Rank is established through strength, maintained through intimidation, and the bottom of the hierarchy submits because the top can credibly hurt it. Power flows downward. Hunter-gatherers flipped this entirely. In band societies, the collective, the group as a unified social entity, dominated the individual. If anyone started accumulating more than their share of food, more status than the group was comfortable with, more influence over decisions than a peer among equals was supposed to have, the group closed ranks against them. Not through any formal process, through coordinated, sustained, escalating social pressure that started soft and became progressively harder until the problem was either resolved or removed. The system had stages, clear, consistent, documented stages, appearing with striking similarity across cultures that never had any contact with each other. The first stage was gossip. And before you dismiss that as trivial, hear out what gossip actually does in this context, because it is doing serious work. In a hunter-gatherer setting, gossip is not idle social entertainment. It is a powerful, functionally essential tool for collective moral enforcement. When someone began behaving in ways the community found unacceptable, hoarding food, bullying weaker members, cheating at sharing, free riding on the labor of others while contributing substantially less than expected, the community started talking about it, not to the offender's face initially, among themselves. Building shared understanding that this specific person's specific behavior was a specific problem. Developing consensus, coordinating a collective interpretation of events before any public action was taken, so that when public action did arrive, it arrived with the full weight of unanimous community opinion rather than as an individual accusation that the offender could dismiss or retaliate against personally. Hunter-gatherer populations, the Dutch 755 Kungan of the Kalahari, the Hadza of 758 Tanzania, the Jew/Hoansi, 802 multiple Aboriginal Australian groups, 804 consistently finds gossip, serving 806 precisely this regulatory function. At 809 is the early warning system, the 811 community newsletter, the consensus 813 building mechanism, and a social 815 verdict delivery system, all operating 817 simultaneously in casual conversation. Before any formal sanction is applied in 822 these communities, the community is 824 already reached an informal distributed 826 verdict through thousands of small 828 conversations that together constitute 831 kind of collective social trial, 833 conducted without any designated venue, 835 judge or procedure. The offender 838 usually knows the gossip is happening. In a group of 30 people living in 842 constant proximity, you can feel the 844 shift in social temperature, the 846 conversations that stop when you 848 approach, the sharing that happens 850 slightly less fluidly, the eye contact 852 that is calibrated differently. And 854 frequently at this stage alone. Before 856, anything more formal occurs. The 858 offender changes their behavior because 9 o'clock they understand without anyone spelling 904 it out explicitly what the next stage's 906 look like and what the endpoint of the 908 process is. If they don't correct 911 course. This is deterrence without a 913 criminal code. It's working through 915 reputation mechanics that are older than 917 language itself. If gossip failed to 919 produce the necessary correction, the 921 second stage was public criticism and 923 ridicule delivered openly in front of 926 the entire group. In a small band 928 society, public ridicule is not a minor 931 social discomfort that you survive and 933 eventually forget about. It is a serious 935 social event with lasting structural 937 consequences. When the community decides 939 to confront an offender's behavior 941 openly, naming it, mocking it, calling 944 it out explicitly in a context where 946 everyone present understands exactly 947 what is happening. The target is 949. Receiving a very precise communication. 952, the informal protection and goodwill the 954 group normally extends to its members 956 has been formally suspended for you. Pending behavioral correction. Your 1001 status is being publicly revised 1003 downward in a way that everyone 1004 witnesses, and that becomes part of the 1006 community's shared understanding of who 1008 you are. Bao's research found this 1010 pattern with striking consistency across 1013 cultures separated by thousands of miles, 1015 and thousands of years. The Inuit of the 1017 Arctic, the Akangan of southern Africa, 1021, and multiple Aboriginal Australian 1023 groups all maintained active traditions, 1025 of public criticism and ridicule aimed 1028 specifically at individuals who hoarded 1030 resources. Attempted to dominate social 1032 decisions, bullied others, or refused to 1035 participate in the reciprocal sharing 1037 that was the economic foundation of Band 1040 life. The specific forms varied. The 1043 function was identical. A particularly striking version of this 1047 that appears repeatedly across cultures 1049 is what anthropologists call leveling 1051 mechanisms. Communal practices designed with 1055 explicit intent to prevent any 1057 individual from accumulating more 1059 status, resources, or social authority 1101 than the community's egalitarian norms 1104 permitted. In multiple documented 1106 hunter-gatherer cultures, a successful 1108 hunter was not expected to announce or 1111 celebrate his own achievement. A man who 1113 returned to camp and loudly proclaimed 1115 that he had made a remarkable kill, that 1117 he had been especially skilled, that the 1120 group should recognize his contribution. That man was considered boorish, socially 1125 clumsy, and potentially dangerous in his 1127 apparent appetite for status. He would 1129 be mocked. The kill was real. The food 1132 was shared. Everyone ate it. But the 1135 social credit was distributed 1136 collectively rather than concentrated in 1138, the individual who produced it. If he 1141 pushed back against that distribution, if he insisted on receiving the 1145 recognition he felt he'd earned, the 1148 community pushed back harder because 1150, what looked like a dispute about credit 1151, was understood by everyone present as a 1154 dispute about power. And allowing one 1156 person to accumulate power beyond what 1158 the egalitarian structure permitted was 12 o'clock understood as an existential threat to 1202 the social order that kept everyone 1204 safe. When public ridicule failed to 1207 produce correction, the third stage was 1210 ostracism. And this one had consequences that were 1214 in the ancient context genuinely severe. In a modern city, being shunned by a 1220 social group is painful and unpleasant 1222, but ultimately survivable. There are 1225 other social options. You can move 1227 neighborhoods, join different 1229 communities, rebuild a social life from 1232 scratch. The city contains thousands of 1234 people you haven't met yet. The 1237 infrastructure of modern life, food, 1239 availability, shelter, medical care, 1241 doesn't depend on any specific group, 1244 accepting you. In a small band of 20 to 1247 50 people moving through a Paleolithic 1248 landscape with a nearest other human 1251 group, potentially weeks of difficult 1252 travel away. Being excluded from the 1255 community was not a social consequence 1257 in a modern sense. It was a death 1259 sentence with a variable delay, delivered 1302 without anyone having to physically harm 1304 you. You couldn't hunt as effectively 1306 alone as a coordinated group could. You 1308 couldn't defend yourself against 1309 predators during sleep without others 1311 watching. You couldn't process large 1314 game, tend injuries, survive serious 1316 illness, carry infants, or maintain the 13-1900 small cooperative tasks that 1321 group life made manageable and solo life 1323 made nearly impossible. Exclusion from 1326 the ban removed the cooperative 1328 infrastructure that made individual 1330 survival viable in harsh environments. It exposed every vulnerability that 1335 group membership had been quietly 1337 shielding. Ostracism undocumented. Hunter-gatherer societies operated in degrees that matched the escalating structure of the whole system. Initially, it might manifest as a subtle reduction in sharing. The offender remained technically included in group activities, but found that food and resources reached them slightly less smoothly than before. Allies were somehow less available when needed, that the social warmth that had previously surrounded them had been dialed down in ways that were real but individually deniable. If behavior continued, the exclusion formalized. In highly mobile groups, the community could simply move camp without the offender. A specific cruelty available only to people who move regularly and who control entirely whether any given individual knows where they've gone. Cases documented across multiple ethnographic sources involve persistent bullies, chronic resource thieves, and individuals who repeatedly violated sexual boundaries within a group. For these people, when ostracism was fully applied, the outcomes documented in the ethnographic record were typically one of two things. Behavioral correction, in which the person demonstrated genuine change, was cautiously reintegrated and was watched carefully afterward. Or death, either from the practical vulnerabilities of isolation or from the escalation to the fourth and final stage. The fourth stage was execution. Hunter-gatherer execution is one of the most consistently documented and most genuinely startling findings in the extensive ethnographic literature on banned societies. Bao compiled execution cases from across dozens of hunter-gatherer cultures on multiple continents and found the practice not only widespread, but structurally consistent in ways that reveal a coherent underlying logic rather than random violence. When a member of the group had committed sufficiently serious offenses and critically had failed to respond to 1536, every lesser intervention the community 1538 had applied across multiple rounds of 1540 escalating pressure. The group 1542 collectively reached a consensus 1544 decision to kill them. Not a designated 1546 authority figure acting on institutional 1549 mandate. Not a chief exercising 1551 unilateral power. The entire adult 1554 community reaching consensus through 1556, exactly the same distributed 1557 deliberation process that characterized 1600 hours every earlier stage, and then a small 1602 number of individuals, typically men, 1604 carrying out the act on behalf of 1606, everyone simultaneously. The deliberately collective structure of 1611, the decision was not incidental. It was 1614, the whole point. An individual who 1616 killed another group member was a 1617 murderer and would be treated as one, 1620 potentially subjected to the same 1621 process he had just witnessed applied to 1623 someone else. A community that had 1626 collectively reached consensus that a 1628 member had become an intolerable threat 1629 to everyone, and that had collectively 1632 decided to remove that threat, was doing 1634 something categorically different from 1636 individual violence. The communal nature 1639 of the act removed it from the domain of 1641 personal grievance and placed it 1643 explicitly in the domain of social 1645 necessity. Responsibility was 1647 distributed so broadly that no single 1650 person bore the full weight of it. The 1652 offenses that drew this ultimate 1654 community response were consistent 1655 across cultures to a degree that is 1657 itself significant. Unprovoked and 1700 hours repeated serious violence against Group 1702 members, serial killing within the band, 1704 predatory sexual behavior that the 1706 individual had demonstrated across 1708 multiple rounds of lesser intervention, 1711 was not going to stop. The threshold was 1713, not a single act in the heat of 1715 conflict. The pattern preceding 1718 community sanctioned execution was 1720 almost universally one of documented 1722 escalation. A person who had been 1724 warned, mocked, partially excluded, 1727 fully excluded, and who had responded to 1730 each stage by continuing or escalating 1732 precisely the behaviors that made them 1734 dangerous to everyone around them. This 1736 is in its essential structure 1738 recognizably a justice system, not a 1741 primitive proto-version of one. Not the 1743 blunt early sketch of something that 1745 would eventually become law, a Justice 1747 system. It has proportionality. Minor 1750 offenses produce minor sanctions. 1752 serious offenses escalate through 1754 progressively severe responses. It has 1757 process. The community doesn't jump from 1800 hours first offense to execution. It works 1802 methodically through stages with space 1804 for a correction at each level. It has 1807 consensus. No individual decides alone. 1810, it has purpose. The explicit goal is not 1813 personal revenge, but the restoration 1816 and maintenance of a functional, safe, 1818 cooperative social environment for 1820 everyone who depends on it. Now, fast 1823 forward several thousand years, because 1825 this is where the story takes a turn 1827 that complicates the simple narrative of 1829 human progress. When humans settled into 1831 agricultural societies and began 1833 building the first cities and formal 1835 states, the justice system didn't 1837 immediately improve in every dimension. It got more elaborate. It got written 1842 down. It got scalable in ways that small 1844 band social enforcement could never be. And it introduced something the Hunter 1848 gatherer system. For all its limitations, 1850 and occasional brutality have been 1852 specifically and deliberately designed 1854 to prevent. The oldest physical law code, 1857, that archaeologists have so far 1859 recovered is the Code of Hammurabi, written 1901 in ancient Sumer in Mesopotamia around 1904-100 to 250 BC, more than 4000 years, 1909 ago. It was inscribed on clay tablets in 1912 uniform script organized in a logical, if 1916, then structure that any modern lawmaker 1918 would immediately recognize. If a person 1921 commits offense X, the legal consequence 1924 is Y. Clean, legible, consistent 1928. Written down so that it applied 1929 predictably to everyone rather than 1931 being administered differently in every 1933 individual case by whoever happened in 1935 be in charge that day. What's genuinely remarkable about 1939 Irma's Code, when you look at 1941 closely, is the approach it took to 1943 physical harm between ordinary people in 1946 for bodily injury. Knocking out 1948 someone's eye, breaking someone's bone, 1951 knocking out a tooth. The code specified 1954 monetary fines rather than physical 1956 retaliation. A knocked-out eye cost the 1958 offender half a mina of silver. A 2001 knocked-out tooth cost 2 shekels of 2003 silver. The orientation was toward 2005 financial compensation for the victim, 2008 rather than physical punishment, 2009 inflicted on the offender. Restore the 2012 balance economically. Make the harm 2014 party whole, or as close to whole as 2016 money could manage. Murder, robbery, 2020 adultery, and rape were still capital 2022 offenses. But the general treatment of 2025 physical harm between ordinary people 2026 was, by the standards of what 2028 immediately followed it in the 2029 historical record, surprisingly 2031 measured. That measured approach didn't 2034 survive the next 3 centuries intact. Around 1750 BCE, a Babylonian king, 2042, named Hammurabi commissioned what became 2044 the most famous legal document in all of 2047 ancient history. Snorts, 282 laws, 2050 carved into a black diorite pillar, 2052, standing more than 7 foot tall. Discovered 2055 by French archaeologists in 1901 in what 2058 is now Iran, and now held in the Louvre 2101 in Paris, where it remains one of the 2103 most visited artifacts in the museum. Hammurabi's code moved decisively in 2108 deliberately away from the compensation 2110 model of Uramu towards something the 2112 ancient world would become permanently 2114 associated with an eye for an eye, a 2118 tooth for a tooth. The principle is 2121, called lex salienus, 2123, the law of retaliation. And Hammurabi 2126 didn't invent the concept, but he 2128 elevated it to a formal prominence at 2130. Had never previously achieved in written law. Under his code, the punishment was designed to mirror the crime physically and directly. If a builder constructed a house that collapsed and killed the owner's son, the builder's son would be executed, not the builder, his son. The logic of collective family accountability for individual crimes produced some of the code's most striking and, to modern eyes, most troubling provisions. But the element of Hammurabi's code that most sharply distinguishes it from everything that came before is its explicit formal built-in class stratification of punishment. If a free man knocked out the eye of another free man, the free man lost his eye. If the same free man knocked out the eye of a slave, he paid a fine. The physical injury in both cases was identical. The social status of the victim determined the entire legal response. The harm to the victim was the same. The law treated it as categorically different depending on who the victim was. This was genuinely new. This was what settled hierarchical, institutionally governed society added to the justice equation. Formal, written, consistently applied rules which represented a real advance over purely ad hoc individual decisions, combined with explicit codification of inequality into the structure of punishment itself. The hunter-gatherer band, with its obsessive leveling mechanisms and its reverse dominance hierarchy, would have recognized this instantly as precisely the thing it had been working so hard for so long to prevent. Bao had documented how hunter-gatherer communities actively resisted attempts by any member to claim special treatment, including specifically the claim that harm done to a more important person should be punished more severely. Person deserved a more serious response, 2337, than harm done to a less important one. 2340, the whole reverse dominance hierarchy, 2342, existed to prevent exactly that logic 2344 from taking hold. Civilization wrote 2346 that logic in a law and called it 2348 justice. Here's what all of this adds up 2352, and it is genuinely worth sitting 2352 with for a moment. The hunter-gatherer 2355 justice system with its escalating 2357 stages moving from gossip through 2358 ridicule, through ostracism, through 2400 hours community execution, running on 2402 collective consensus rather than 2404 designated authority, maintained by 2406 distributed social responsibility rather 2408 than institutional officials, was not a 2411 crude, undeveloped prototype of what 2413 came later. In several important 2415 respects, it was more sophisticated than 2417, the early written codes that replaced 2419 it. It had genuine proportionality, built 2421 in from the ground up. It had 2423 multi-stage process with space for 2425 correction at every level. It had a 2428 distributional ethics encoded in its 2430 design. The powerful were not exempt 2433 from social sanction. The entire point 2435 of the reverse dominance hierarchy was 2437 that nobody was exempt. Being stronger 2440 or better at hunting or more charismatic 2442 bought you no protection whatsoever from 2445 communal enforcement of shared 2446 behavioral norms. If anything, 2448 accumulating any of those advantages 2450 made the community watch you more 2452 carefully, not less. The shift to 2455 written codes, formal institutions, and 2457 professional legal systems brought 2459 genuine irreplaceable benefits. Predictability across a much larger 2504 population. Protection from purely 2506 arbitrary individual decisions by 2508 whoever happened to have power at any 2510 given moment. The ability to govern 2512 communities far too large for everyone 2514 to know everyone personally. But it also 2517 introduced the formalization of social 2519 inequality into the structure of justice 2521 itself in a way that the hunter-gatherer 2523 system had been actively and consciously 2525 fighting against for most of human 2527 existence. The ancient humans standing in 2529 collective judgment over a chronic bully 2531 who had refused every lesser 2533 intervention the community offered 2534 didn't have a courtroom or a gavel or a 2537 legal code or a professional vocabulary 2540 for what they were doing. But they had 2542 something that every court in every 2544 civilization that followed was trying 2546 with varying degrees of success to